This video is about follow-up surveys. We will discuss when you should conduct follow-up surveys, what sections to complete, and the most confusing questions of the GIPRA survey. 6-month follow-ups should be completed 5 to 8 months after the intake survey. Completed surveys should be returned to the Office of Behavioral Health within 5 days of completion. Email completed surveys to gipra@maine.gov and include the agency abbreviation, client ID, and survey type in the file name. Sections of the GIPRA survey are either program staff reported or client reported. Sections are clearly marked. Program staff reported sections should be completed without the client's input. Client reported sections are meant to be completed as the client discloses. If you have information that contradicts the client's response, that should not be factored in when completing the GIPRA survey. You should only report what the client informs you. Questions cannot be left blank. You can either select don't know or refused. Questions must be asked as they are written. Do not paraphrase. You are permitted to clarify questions, but this should only occur after the question has been asked verbatim. If the response options are listed in lowercase, read them aloud and allow the client to select an option. If the response options are uppercase, do not read the response options and instead allow the client to answer the question in their own words. Now we will go over how to complete the GIPRA form for a 6-month follow-up survey. The first question you will complete is client ID. In order to ensure that information collected in the GIPRA survey remains confidential and de-identified, do not include any identifying information about the client in the ID, such as name or initials, date of birth, social security number, or mother's maiden name. Each client should be assigned a unique client ID to be used at each data collection point. This means the same ID should be used for intake, follow-up, and discharge. If a client drops out of your program and later re-enrolls, they should use the same ID number. If your organization already uses de-identified client IDs, you may continue to use that number. You will then move on to client type and select either treatment client or client name recovery. For survey date, fill in the date that you completed the survey with the client. For survey type, select 6-month follow-up. For did the client consent to a full GIPRA survey, you would select yes and skip the next question. You will then move on to Section A, Behavioral Health Diagnoses. Next, you will complete Section A, Behavioral Health Diagnoses. This is a program staff reported question. For this question, you can only pick up to 3 diagnoses listed from F10.10 to F99. Only 1 diagnosis can be primary, only 1 can be secondary, and only 1 can be tertiary. If you don't know whether the diagnosis is primary, secondary, or tertiary, you can simply select it as diagnosed. Don't know and none of the above are also options. However, if you select a diagnosis, you cannot also select don't know or none of the above. Next, you will complete questions 1 and 2, which are to be completed by program staff. Question 1 asks whether the client was diagnosed with an opioid use disorder during the past 30 days. If you are unsure, don't know is an acceptable answer. In question 1A, if the client received an FDA-approved medication, you must also provide the number of days the client received the medication, with a max of 30 days. Regardless of your answer for question 1, you must complete question 1A. The same thing goes for question 2 and question 2A. Next, you will complete Section B, Drug and Alcohol Use, which is a client-reported section. This section is about illegal drug use and prescription drug misuse. If a client has a prescription and is using it appropriately, that use should not be recorded. Since the response options in this section are lowercase, read them aloud to the client and allow them to select an option. Question B1C asks about the client's illegal drug use, and B2A to B2I asks about the use of specific substances. GIPRA is a federal survey tool, and marijuana is illegal federally. Therefore, marijuana is included in illegal drug use. If the value of any items in questions B2A to B2I are greater than 0, you must also provide the root. Roots are listed. The values in sections B2A to B2I cannot be greater than the value reported in question B1C. For example, if a client originally reports 0 illegal drug use in question B1C, but any of the values in B2A to B2I are greater than 0, you must adjust the value in B1C. There are don't know and refused options for the questions about use and root. Next, you'll complete Section C, Family and Living Conditions. This is a client-reported section. For questions 3 through 5, the response options are written in lowercase. Read the answer options to the client and allow them to select an option. If the client reported any alcohol or any illegal drug use in Section B, the responses to these questions cannot be not applicable. Refused and don't know are acceptable answers to all 3 questions. Next, you will complete question 7. The response options are written in all caps, so do not read the options aloud to the client and instead allow them to answer the question in their own words. If the answer to this question is yes, you must complete parts A through D. If the response is no, don't know, or refused, skip to Section D. Next, you'll complete Section D, Education, Employment, and Income, which is a client-reported section. Remember that questions on the GIPRA survey cannot be left blank. This means that for question 4, you must fill in all sections, even if it is a 0. Next, you will complete Section E, Crime and Criminal Justice Status, which is a client-reported section. The response options in this section are written in all caps, which means you should not read the response options to the client. Instead, allow them to answer the questions in their own words. For question 4, if the client reported illegal drug use in Section B, the answer to this question should be no less than the use reported in B1C, since illegal drug use is a crime. If the client used illegal drug use more than once a day in the past 30 days, the value here should be greater than 30. Refused and don't know are both acceptable answers. Section F, Mental and Physical Health Problems and Treatment/Recovery, is a client-reported section. If in question 2 you select yes to any of the services, you must also provide the amount of nights or times the client received that type of care. Next, you'll complete Section F, Violence and Trauma, which is a client-reported section. The response options in this section are written in all caps. Do not read the response options to the client and instead allow them to answer the questions in their own words. Next, you'll complete Section G, Social Connectedness, which is a client-reported section. For questions 1 through 5, the response options are listed in all caps. Do not read the response options to the client. Allow the client to answer the question in their own words. For question 6, the response options are lowercase. Read the response options to the client and allow them to select a response. Next, you'll complete Section I, Follow-up Status, which is a program staff reported section. Question 2 is about your program, not grant-funded services. Once you have finished this section, you have completed a follow-up and you can submit this form to gipra@maine.gov.